Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. Content warning, as the title suggests, we are talking about layoffs and losing your job. Just not fun. Have you ever been laid off or fired, Samantha?
Yes, I have. Rude of you to ask, but I'm going to tell you anyway. But essentially, I think it was more pragmatic and it's just the timing of everything. But it didn't feel great. I did get unemployment, though, for a while.
Oh.
That was an interesting process.
That's nice. You'll have to tell me, because we are going to talk about that briefly.
Yeah.
In here. You'll have to tell me about that. I have never been laid off. I have lost a position before where they were like, you're just not good at this. Why don't you do this? That's all right.
You've been rearranged.
I was rearranged. I kind of feel like I was stealth fired from Longhorn Steakhouse, which I've told that story before.
Like, you didn't even make it, though.
I both feel I was stealth fired, but also I wasn't showing up. So there was no official process. We just both kind of ghosted each other. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I have ever had that. I don't think so. I've always put in my notice and left.
I had I've worked for a company that I don't think it went under, but something happened where within the first week I didn't have a job.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like it felt like that whole thing just went away. So.
Right.
But I had to go find another job quickly because I was in Europe and I was anticipating. Oh. That's why I was there.
Uh-oh.
And I did. I was very fortunate. Yes. Through the time I've worked at this company, which long time now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I kind of forget you have other jobs. You've ever had other jobs.
That's right. It feels weird to me, too, to remember. We have had rounds of layoffs, and it is scary. We had a pretty emotional one when I was an intern where, like, I was young and it was my first time, I think, ever. When at this particular instance, they like sat us all in a room and told us about it. And then people were crying and like people were packing up. And
oh my gosh.
You feel like, well, it's just a very destabilizing feeling.
Yeah.
And we recently had a round of layoffs here and several of my friends were laid off. So it's scary. And there have been there's been a lot of stuff written about what's happening in the tech industry specifically, with a lot of the layoffs that it kind of started in 2020, but 2023 and 2024 were a big year for layoffs, unfortunately. And they impacted more women and marginalized folks. And we're going to talk about that and why that is. I would say you can check out our past episode, spoiler alert, on pregnancy discrimination. Our work from home episodes, women and unions, perhaps, and the episode we did, what's happening at Blizzard, which we should update that one. Oh my. But okay, so yes, for this, we're specifically looking at several rounds of tech and journalism layoffs that happened this year and how they have disproportionately impacted women and people of color. And throughout the year, this year being 2024, we have seen several high-profile rounds of layoffs. And we're going to look at a few examples that highlight some troubling trends.
Right. And some baseline numbers to start off here. Since the beginning of 2023, huge companies like Google, Meta, and Amazon have laid off tens of thousands of their employees. More recently, Tesla laid off 14,000. The amount of jobs lost in the tech sector are estimated to be upwards of 340,000, and the number has since grown.
In April of 2024, Tesla fired the 500-ish members of their supercharger team, including the top woman manager, Rebecca Tanucci, who was the company's top female employee. Allegedly, Elon Musk, who, if you somehow managed to avoid it, in which case, congrats to you, runs that.
Tell us your secret. How about that?
Your secret. That's his company. He sent out a questionnaire requiring managers to justify their human resources with an email that contained the line, Hopefully, these actions are making it clear that we need to be absolutely hardcore about headcount and cost reduction. Meanwhile, many industry journalists reported that this action made no sense for the success of Tesla. Like, that was a big project and it didn't make sense. Another Elon Musk company, Twitter/X, also saw mass layoffs. 57% of those layoffs were women, and that company is embroiled in so many lawsuits, and some of them are about that.
Right. Just, especially with the amount of money this specific dude gets for doing nothing but wreak havoc. I'm like, you could have saved probably tens of thousands of jobs just by cutting your salary in half. Other companies like Dell have been accused of stealth layoffs targeting women with their return to office policies. In early 2024, they gave their employees two options: a hybrid option of coming into the office and working remotely, or continuing to work completely remotely. However, choosing that option came with penalties. So one of them were, quote, no funding for team on-site meetings, even if a large portion of the team is flying in for a meeting from other Dell locations. No career advancement, no career movements, and remote status will be considered when planning or organization changes, aka workforce reductions.
Yes. And according to one employee interviewed, if someone got promotion while working remotely, it required them to come in 39 days every quarter to accept it. And just a note, Dell wasn't even necessarily providing these offices, or they didn't have enough space, I guess. And working remotely was and had been a part of their hiring policy. It was how they hired a lot of people who were like, I just want to work remote. And they're like, we got you. We're a cool company, and that's great.
We're a cool company. We're the cool moms.
Yeah, they were all about it. And now...
Which is what tech does, I feel like. And Dell is such like the boomer of tech companies. Let's just be really honest. It's like they're like, look, we're cool. Not only can you work from home, but yes, we originated with the open spaces and the unlimited PTO, which you really can't take, and snacks, and maybe a cool concert here and there.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna dive more into that in a second, but yes. It's pretty ridiculous though, because this is from the standards you were reading, Samantha. That was from like an official Dell email.
Right.
And to say like,
JK.
Well, you better come in or you're not going to get any career advancement, and you're going to be the first we consider when we're thinking about cutting our workforce. And as we did discuss in our Women Working Remotely episode, it does benefit a lot of women, especially if there's childcare involved. I mean, obviously, that still sucks if you have to work while doing childcare. But it is a way that people were able to have these jobs where maybe they couldn't before. Okay. In November of 2023, a woman laid off from Okta in 2020 filed a civil suit in San Francisco Superior Court. She alleged that, along with other women, she came forward with concerns about gender discrimination. And then after that, her reviews dropped drastically until she was eventually fired. And the suit claimed that women experience, quote, severe bias and inequity. The lawsuit read, like other women, Mrs. Ho was encouraged to speak up and was told that this is a safe place to tell all, but it was a big trap. Once she found courage to speak, she was retaliated against. And that's in the larger conversation about retaliation that we're not necessarily getting into today, but that is part of this. While a lot of what we are talking about is tech-specific, journalism also has been really impacted. And in a lot of ways, a lot of that industry has become a tech industry. In early 2024, a wave of layoffs hit the journalism industry, and people raised the alarm that a lot of them hit women and people of color, and how that was going to negatively impact the landscape of our news and information, what's being reported on, how it's being written. According to the Coalition for Women in Journalism, they reported that there were 17,000 layoffs in this space in 2023. Entertainment companies like Netflix and Disney also have similar conversations to be had. But those are for a different episode. Also, this is not at all just a U.S. problem, but we are talking mainly about U.S.-based companies today. And a lot of those companies are so big, people all over the world work for them. And a lot of this has been underscored by the fact that when many of these companies were just getting started, they were mostly run and staffed by white men. As more attention landed on that point, as more people were like, hey, as the calls for change grew, these companies made bold promises of being more inclusive in their hiring practices in the 2010s, especially as they got bigger and made more money and became more structured and corporate. But a lot of them were still really famous for the thinking outside the box in terms of office life, of like happy hours and gaming areas and bowling alleys and movie theaters, all of that stuff that in a lot of ways didn't suit women, especially if they had kids. But even things like feeling safe with your employees or employers after hours or getting home late. And that's what we talked about in the Blizzard episode, kind of the difference between a woman going to a conference and having a drink versus a man doing it, and how it can look really gross in office space. On top of that, a lot of companies supported and encouraged people moving during the pandemic. And we've discussed it before, but those policies, again, did benefit a lot of women and marginalized people. So one other thing that can get kind of lost is that some of the numbers indicate more men were laid off in these cases, percentage-wise. But the key thing is women often represent less percentage-wise in the workforce. So, for instance, in one analysis of 3,400 people laid off, 55% were men, 45% were women. However, women only made up 39% of the total workforce, so it impacted them far more. Some estimates put the number of women laid off as higher, and the women in the industry also as lower.
So a piece of this is that women are more likely to get hired in positions that are more easily cut, at least to the higher ups, like customer service or HR. When it comes to seniority, too, men are more likely to have been there longer. This isn't even touching on women or marginalized folks who left because of burnout or harassment.
Other episodes we've done.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Studies show that women are less financially prepared for layoffs than men, and this could be because of a lot of things like the gender wage gap, pink tax, all kinds of stuff. Women who relocate for their spouses, especially in the military, are disproportionately impacted too. And this brings us to the pregnancy discrimination part. In the wake of the tech layoffs that happened in May of 2024, a disturbing number of accounts about pregnant folks, people with postpartum or on parental leave, came out about them being a large percentage or a significant percentage of the ones that were cut in terms of the number that they represented. Lawyers reported receiving calls about pregnancy discrimination across the country. However, there just aren't safeguards in place specifically protecting pregnant folks or people on parental leave under the grounds of business necessities. The discrimination is difficult to prove in the face of mass layoffs, too. But the thing is, like, a lot of these big companies use their parental leave plans to attract new employees too, especially women. But in these recent waves of layoffs, a lot of the people who were laid off were women, especially women on leave. So it doesn't seem to be matching up.
Right. And that's not even the conversation about like FLSA and what you have to do to qualify for that and how to get through with that and how not to be fired before getting with that. So. So it's really scary to lose your job at any time, but especially when you've had a big life change, like having a kid that is going to put more financial pressure on you and your family. On top of that, if you have a baby and no access to childcare, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to get a new job for at least a little while.
Yes. And so this also goes back to a point we've discussed before, but a lot of these companies just put into place these diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI initiatives around women and people of color and LGBTQ plus people and people with disabilities, but without really making any change to how the company functioned to make those things work. Like they didn't think it out beyond just saying, yeah, we're going to do this, or to account for the reality of what being truly inclusive would mean. So We've also seen a lot of companies doing away with those initiatives entirely in recent years. It's become something of a controversial issue in our political landscape.
It's literally a platform like that people are using to be like, I should be your governor, your congressman, your board of directors, whatever. Like, it's absurd. Like, I will get rid of DEI. I mean, we need to come back and talk about the fact that the damn Asian person who was puppet essentially coming after DEI initiatives, inclusivity initiatives for higher education. And now the number of Asian students being accepted has lowered. No other numbers, just the Asians. I'm like, yeah, that's what you get.
Yeah. And there's a lot going on with this, because it really does feel to me that number one, most obviously they're companies and they want to make money. And they thought like saying these things would make them money.
And they still do, even during this time. When it benefits them, aka like pride parades. They're like, we're gonna be in here even though we've already backtracked in all of these policies.
Right. And it's like the second that it becomes, oh, they're striking, or oh, they're doing this, we don't need this. And it's just like they're just saying it to get the points and then not doing anything about it. But I also truly do think they didn't even think it through about how this would work or look, or they didn't want to mess up with their boys club bowling alleys or whatever.
Right. They're happy hours.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a couple of like key things people have written about, we've spoken about on the show. One is the importance of mentors in spaces like this. But if all the mentors are white men, doesn't really work. And then there is the myth of the white male genius who is so
that just makes me laugh.
Can never make a mistake, is like the god of whatever company. And then, so even when they clearly do make a mistake, they are never face these consequences. But everyone else who is not that does.
Right. I mean, we have one trying to run for president again.
Yeah. Yeah. I laugh because I'm miserable.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also, going back to what you kind of mentioned, Samantha, there's this return that we're seeing happen to hardcore bro culture. And so Elon Musk is a great example, because when he took over Twitter, he was like boasting about, you're going to sleep at work, you're going to be working all the time, you're like all of these things as if this is a good thing.
Right.
But that was the myth of a lot of these companies that started as startups, was like you lived there. That's how it worked. But it's strange because that company was successful.
Right.
Yeah.
But you start looking at the companies that have these thought processes. They made a whole freaking movie on Facebook alone, and you realize the majority of the success comes from stealing things from people.
Yeah.
More than like not Napster, all of those things. Like you're like, wait, these boys are not geniuses. They just know how to get away with stealing.
Exactly.
And
Or taking credit. Yeah, just taking credit for other people's work.
Right. And Elon Musk, Bezos is the same thing. And then I know you're about to get into it, but it's amazing, this whole mentality of like, you have to dedicate your life for a company, but we're not going to reward you, obviously. No. And like even the fact that Amazon had that whole thing, like they could not go take bathroom breaks, so they were peeing in bottles. And of course, women can't freaking do that really at all. And they have this mentality that if you leave that station and you are stealing time from work, which is absurd, being paid for not working. You're like, this is not how this works. And we're backtracking on all these things that were protected so that people could have access to be human.
Right.
In this whole culture of like, no, but if you really care about making money, if you really want to be successful, this is what you do.
Right. And if you can't hack it, then get out.
Then you're going to be fired and we'll replace you. You're easily replaceable.
Exactly. Exactly. And it just is bizarre also because, of course, they try to paint it as if you were being weak when
Hmm.
you're like, really? You think people just want to sleep at work or pee in bottles?
Right.
What?
Like you think that this is a thing that like being human once again is a detriment, like eating.
Right.
I'm sorry. We are hungry. You cannot live that way. We've had people die recently, a couple of incidences at work, and no one found them because they did not care about these people.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, you know, Elon Musk is going to be fine. It's essentially like
Even with the
he's,
millions that like, he's going to be sued, he may be sued. He may
yeah,
like go to like courts and may even go to jail. He'll still be fine.
he'll be fine. And so he's just asking his employees to fix something he broke and
Right.
ruin your life while doing it.
He's broken it so many times.
He really
And
has.
can we talk about how moody his whole thing is? Like the whole new block thing is rumored that because he wanted his ex-wife's access to her account, and if she blocked him, and
Oh,
so the reason that they changed
gosh.
that up recently is so that he could still access her stuff. That's the
Isn't
rumor.
isn't that like that comes up an embarrassing amount for you white male geniuses is that it was a woman that hurt you somewhere.
Right. And so therefore he has to do all these things in retaliation of like
Yes.
how petty he's gonna be. And you're like, so you changed the whole blocking access, which did not, that's the one thing that didn't really need to be fixed because you were upset that you could not see your ex-wife's content. Really? Again, rumors. This is not
Yeah,
been,
yeah,
this
yeah.
has not
It
been
would not
verified.
surprise me.
But I'm like, it's really coincidental.
It would not surprise me at all.
Anyway.
But I mean, also, I want to come back and do an episode on this, but when I say like the return to this hardcore bro culture, it's happening online as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening in a lot of spaces that some of them we've touched on. I've seen some around the world that are happening, but a part of it is because of this, because of people like Elon Musk who come in and do all these terrible things, fire all the people of color, fire all the women. And so the technology that is people are using is really boosting that content. And it's been sadly effective in a lot of ways. But yeah, that kind of, we got away from it for a minute. But then I was reading a very depressing article about this. But essentially, it kind of snapped backwards in the way so many of these things often do. For a lot of reasons, but
well, I wonder if it just looked that way. Once again, it was just a painted perspective because when we talked about the Google creator and content developer and the things that she went through, and she was like, hey, this AI stuff is not going to go well. This is going to be racist and we should not be doing any of these things. And she immediately got fired and everybody's like, exit her out. Like it was always there. But it was better hidden. And now just people just don't care anymore, especially with the fact that the government allows so much leeway for tech companies to do whatever the hell they want, which is a whole different conversation that we've repeatedly have had to have. And no one's really talking about these issues. Like, I'm really upset and concerned that again, abortion is a huge issue. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about that. Queer rights, huge issues. But all these things are happening, but we're like, what about the underlying things that we need to talk about with each one of these Congress people, which a few people have brought up, including John Ossoff being like, hey, so we should not allow government officials to be a part of the stocks. They should not be able to practice in trading because there's some really shady stuff happening. And I completely agree with that on both sides. This is where I'm like, this whole system is corrupt. So I have a whole like, yes, I am far leaning left and I am losing it. Like I am going faster on that track because we are seeing like even the people that we were supposed to trust and that we put on pedestals and we're so proud of calling our representatives, or at least like representatives in the States, like, oh, but you just made tons of money on this one thing that really hurt the American people. And you know this. That's why like fracking and those issues are such a huge issue, because you are putting money and banking on how much money you're going to make and using your policies. So all these conversations that this is a huge thing we should be looking at, but we haven't really even considered at all. And I say we, including myself, because we have to look at the bigger, huge picture. First, to save democracy. Second, we'll come back to the big issues with like the constitutional stuff and the Supreme Court. And then thirdly, we'll come to these other things of like, why are they doing this? And whose interest is this for?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, a lot of these big companies, they do get occasionally, they do get fined, but for them, it's nothing. Like it's
better to be fined than to correct something and do something that's better for the people. Like this is the biggest concern, is like even with the small companies that had good intent, they've grown into such big companies that have been taken over and or that have made enough money that they're like, I don't care anymore.
Right.
It makes me sad. But the fact that all of these things are happening and these big tech companies do not care. They would rather have a fine and have a whole like smear campaign about the fact that they are sexist and racist and like all of like anti-LGBT, like all of those things, and homophobic as hell. They don't care because it still makes them money and it doesn't do much. Like because the governments and or policies have held them up and be like, yeah, but you can still do that. That's racist, but it'll probably help us in the end, and we can get better jobs, more jobs, and that's, which is not true. But like all of these conversations that I'm like, yeah, that's part of the big problem, is that these companies will never change because they're never ever, and they're also not taxed correctly.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, well, that's the whole separate thing.
I know I'm opening up both of these doors, but like when we see these conversations, these layoffs, why they don't care and they put on like the lipstick on the pig type of conversation is literally like that's what they do, and knowing that they'll just talk about the next company that does it.
Yeah,
and we'll be lumped in here, but they'll forget because there's so many of us and they can't do anything to all of us because the policies protect us.
Right, and it does. I mean, there are so many things in place, like this coming back to the office and coming back to the like hardcore bro culture. I mean, these models, so many of these models, even with the like, oh, now we're open space, do favor men. They were designed with men in mind.
Right.
And so having this idea of like coming into the office that's better, it shows that you like really care, and like, even if they'll tell you it won't penalize you, but if you don't come in, they do, even if it's not purposeful, even if it's like just in the back of someone's subconscious.
Right. The more you're seen, the more you're likely to be remembered. It's kind of that conversation too. But I find it interesting. I'm going to go back to our own experience the last time we were in the studio, and we had Maya, our executive producer, who was a powerhouse. I didn't know how strong she really was, like willing to stand up for like what she felt was a wrong. But the fact is, had we not, we were being pushed over for men. Like it was so interesting how quickly people wanted to side with a bigger name, any of those like. There's two separate sides. There's a radio side and there is a podcast side. This was one of the things that came together during the pandemic in hopes that they could save money. B, they're being like, we're going to be working from home anyway, so it's fine. Even though then they started being like, come back into work. We were all like, why? But then like we did come back to work, and the moment we did, we were like being pushed as a secondary in comparison to a bigger like male group of broadcasters. It wasn't their fault, right. But everything they were doing was literally like, no, but we're more important. Oh no, but yeah, we have a system where it's set up so you have to sign things up on like a whole big calendar, but that doesn't matter because we are more important. It was a whole different like, and I feel like most of that, and this is again on us, but at the same time on society, where we were like, oh, okay, we don't want to cause conflict. We'll move. Okay. But Maya being like, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
No, I will fight with you. I will fight with the heads in here. Let's go. And she made sure to put that respect. And she's like, and being like, you are disrespecting us. And she never really says that. She was just like, this is absurd. This is not how it goes. We need to set a boundary. And I was like, damn. Okay. Because like societally, we would have just moved on. Like that was what we've always been told. We've all been, even in the old office, there's moments where we were like, why is this happening? We have to shrink. And people wonder why. And then when we didn't, I was like, dang, impressive. Like everything worked out, but it just feels like that type of culture is what we have seen so often.
Yeah.
In like the likes of any social, like any space. And I'm not saying anything bad about our company necessarily in this specific moment, but like things like this have continued to happen in the office to the point that this is why Maya was like, I'm done. I'm done.
Well, and it's like, this was a very particular instance, but in this instance, everyone involved had done everything right, everything correctly. We had the space.
Like everybody involved on our side.
Many of the other, most of the other studios were open.
Yeah.
So it wasn't.
It was odd.
It was odd. A lot of threads here, obviously, but I'm so glad Maya stood up and it worked out fine. But it took time out of our day. Yeah. And I ended up getting home, I think 3 hours later than I had planned.
Right.
And that was unnecessary. It was unnecessary. It was a waste of time.
Right. And honestly, like in this like scope of what it was, but it just, so the bottom line on this was like, it feels like a standard because we've had this done to us a few times. The few times that we were in the studio, we've had this done multiple times where we were like, scooch over, sorry. And that's that expectation. And typically it has always been men who overtake our studio. Am I wrong? Every time I remember this situation, it's always been dudes.
Yeah.
Because
they just expect it. Yeah,
they feel like this is the standard. I can do this. We can do this, and it's kind of and even when we had been like, "Hey, this is an issue," they'd be like, "Just comply for now, and we'll fix this later." Which again, it teaches us and them nothing's going to be done. And I think this is the first time, again, why we saw Maya being like, "Nah." I'm over this. And which again, I was so thoroughly impressed that I was like, oh, because this is the first time we've seen it from someone who was in charge of our time in studios place. Yeah. So it was impressive for that matter. But also it wasn't a big deal, but it is the bigger scope of things of like, why is this a standard? And y'all think this is okay. And then y'all want us to be in here and talking about being empowered and acting like this is a safe workspace when you obviously show how little we mean as a part of this family company.
When I was thinking about this topic of running through my head, I wanted to do an episode on the origins of the phrase "go back to the kitchen," because I've just seen it. It's everywhere, and it's been everywhere. It's all like one of the first things usually men will say to a woman they don't agree with. And I was just like thinking about that, and I feel like that can kind of translate here, where it is still seen as like, oh well, they don't have to be here. They can go back home. They can go do that.
Marginalized people are expendable.
Right. Like that idea just permeated. And I was also thinking about a lot of the invisible work women do usually. And we've done episodes on like the whole spectrum of it. But like as a single woman, you can get asked to do a lot of the parties, the planning, all of these events that you don't get paid for, really don't get recognized for because you don't have kids. So what are you doing? But then on the other side, people with kids being penalized because they have kids.
Right.
And they have to go home. So it's just sort of like all of these expectations or punishments that are just there.
Right.
Even if they're not in writing, they are there.
Right. And the extra amount of work that is expected. Again, planning a party is a pretty significant deal when you're having a giant group of people. To be fair, I think like people have realized this is an ordeal
Mhm.
for the most part, especially when people don't do it. They're like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Those are my favorite moments.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, I think that conversation is like the whole women in layoffs and really figuring it out to they're expendable.
Mhm.
We can easily replace them. We could all of these conversations and putting them at positions that are replaceable in their minds, whether or not they understand how big of a conversation. Like, no, they're not as expendable as you think.
Right.
But especially when they put the load that they do on most of these types of positions
Mhm.
that they think is so menial in their bigger scheme of
Right.
conversations. When like, I know the saying goes is essentially you rise up to do less work. Like if you don't, if
Right.
you actually want to not have to do much, get a promotion type of thing, and people
Right.
will do the work for you. And I think that's what we see, and which is why, again, like women are at the forefront of being laid off and or excuses, like again, the pregnancy, which blows my mind in every respect. I'm like, I don't understand why that's the qualifier. Just okay, whatever. There's so many things in this conversation that needs to be, again, readdressed. But yeah, as I am going on my tirade of like, it doesn't change much. The culture of a business who says they're trying to appreciate the marginalized people are the same people who are like, yeah, but you need to be able to be shrunk. You need to be smaller so we can exist as an peaceful office. Like you need to make peace. You need to be okay and don't make any waves here. And it's such an interesting thing in that same way, but like they're willing to get rid of those people who are probably the peacekeepers of the office.
Probably. And are most likely doing a lot more work than you're realizing.
Right.
Also, this whole conversation has also brought up conversations around things like just cause. So that means that companies legally have to give you a reason why you're fired. Not always. You have to fight for that in some cases. But in layoffs, it's a kind of ambiguous space. So like I said, some of that's why it's been so hard to prove, is you can't, it's difficult. Also, severance policies, that's come to light, and discussion has been had about that and how good or bad they are. But I did want to ask you, so you got some unemployment?
I did. And the amount, I don't think unemployment has gone up either since I've had unemployment, and that was 14 years ago. I think the amount, state of Georgia has remained the same because that, y'all, it doesn't, it's not much. And what sucks is it's taxed. It's taxed awfully. Yeah. So essentially, weekly benefits for the state of Georgia goes from $55 to $365 a week, but it is taxed, so 1/3 of it is gone. So essentially, you may be able to get $1,200 a month. Can you imagine living off that? And if you get a part-time job, that goes away.
Right.
You cannot make money, and you have to show every week that you are trying to find a job. The amount of things that you have to do to get unemployment, and you can easily be removed. The amount of taxes that you have to pay, because you can choose not to have it taxed at the beginning and then at the end. Man, that hurt me.
Yeah.
It hurt me a lot.
And
I was trying to find a job. This was when I just turned 30. Everything felt like the worst. And I was trying my damnedest and like trying to find a job and trying to get back into social, all these things. But the fact that it has not changed in that long of a period, like that's the most absurd thing to me right now.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, like, if companies don't have to offer severance policies, and even if they do, if they could find a way to say like they had just cause, they had a reason to fire you, they don't have to give it to you.
And unemployment is also contingent on that. If they had just cause and you got fired and it's your fault, if you quit any of those things, you don't get unemployment.
Yeah.
And a job can fight against you
Yes.
to not get unemployment because it comes from their taxes.
Right.
So it's so
Yes.
gross.
It is. And again, going back to so many of these things, but especially with women who might have children or people who might have children, like finding a job, and it's not easy. Finding one where you could maybe have flexible hours or work from home, also not easy. So it is a huge tax on women and people of color. And then it's just hard to find a job. I think, you might have really cared about your job, and so you don't quite feel like just moving on, or maybe you're a little depressed.
Right.
There's a lot going on where $1,200 a month is not gonna
Right.
it's not gonna cut it.
Also, just that conversation of the fact that you have to give a reason as to why you're laid off.
Yeah.
And hopefully that you're like, oh, it was just a mass decision, da-da-da. But we know a lot of these companies have become vindictive and saying they're laying off based on performance.
That's true.
And that in itself is like a marker on many of those people who are being laid off. And then some who are vindictive and give bad
reviews.
recommendations, which, by the way, is illegal. Technically.
Well.
Weirdly.
Yeah. It's a mess. Obviously, there's a lot of other paths we could go down with this one. But
oh God, yeah. I'm thinking about the fact that if there's a gap in your resume, they see that as a negative. So if you're off because you were out with your child, they see that as a negative. There's so many bad things.
There are.
I'm sorry.
There are. It's warranted. It's warranted. But listeners, if you have any thoughts on this, I know some of you were impacted, I think, by some of the 2023 layoffs. Please let us know, and we hope you're all doing okay, whatever's going on in your life. You can contact us in many ways. You can email us at stuffneededmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at MomStuffPodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We also have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.